Hello world, welcome to the Pocket Gamer podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and the Empress of Indie, the sorceress of small studios, Peggy Ann Saltz. Hello Peggy, we're making 2025 work for us, are we not? It's good to see you again.
It's lovely to see you, Brian, and it feels so good in 2025. I was at an event, Eric Seufert and others got up on stage and told us, it's all good. 2025 is going to be a good year. We're back to being optimistic. We're back to being thinking about what we can do, what we can change. And a big part of that is always going to be creative, right? It is the lever. It is the power. We have got this is the message, right? But again, if you want to think about it, smaller studios, yes, it's about being creative, agile, but resources are limited and expectations, of course, sky high. So it's in that balance that we're finding ourselves and where we're finding our guests as well.
Fantastic. So who do we have joining us? What we're going to talk about? Because, you know me, indie studios champion. I think smaller studios are the lifeblood of the whole sector. So
absolutely, we need them. And that's the other good thing I was hearing. Good games, good creative, good strategy, all has a chance. Before you could have a crap creative and a crap game, but if you could nail it in UA, you could do it. Well, now we're back to where we're all, in a sense, as Warren Buffett would say, we're all swimming naked, right? Okay. You've heard that one before?
January in Scotland? Let's give it a go.
Let's give it a go. I love it. But it's like, in a downturn, you can see who's swimming naked. Well, yeah, that's the whole idea here. And we can also see who has the super power because we're going to decode that. We welcome as our guest Casey Dickinson, CEO of SuperFaction, a company redefining creative as a service model. So it's creative as a service as a model for game studios. Welcome to have you. Great to have you, Casey.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, and I share those sentiments about 2025. If 2024 was survive to 25, and now here we are, I think the companies that survived are well positioned. It's a super dynamic market, but when is it not? I mean, we've been in games for quite a while. It's always ups and downs, and now it for all accounts, it appears that we're back on and up, which is fantastic.
Fantastic. So before we kick off, Casey, talking of ups and downs, that looks like quite a collection of surfboards behind you. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? And let's be honest, which one's your favorite?
Sure. I moved back out to San Diego probably 5-6 years ago and started. Hey, if I'm going to live by the beach, I'm gonna learn how to surf. And wow, is it humbling, for sure. Getting out and trying to learn something that, people are good at it. They make it look real easy and sure is not. And I think that it's a great kind of allegory towards kind of just trying to learn. And I've always been excited about learning new things, and surfing is certainly that. But it's just being out in the ocean. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. And it gets me away from my lovely home office that looks cool, but it's really just my garage, But it gets me out in the ocean, and I love it.
I 100% understand. We don't have surf here. I'm right down on the east coast of Scotland. We do have beautiful water, lochs, and I'm right next to the river, the mighty Forth. So I stand up paddleboard, which is basically surfing for old people with dodgy knees. Standing up, I can do standing up while the ocean moves.
Yeah.
Not so much.
To be fair, most of these are stand-up paddle boards. I stand-up paddle surf because I, too, am one of the old guys that are like, you know what, that looks like a lot more fun. I catch more waves, and when the waves aren't good, I can just kind of paddle up and down the coast. So I love it.
There we go. You see? Bonding already, Peggy. What?
I can see it.
What a great episode.
I can see it. I can see it happening. And we're also part of what I am about, always the puns. You're catching the waves. You're talking about indies, and it has its waves, it has its ups and downs. And some you can see them coming, some you can't. So it's a lot like surfing in a way, Casey. Now, you have shaped SuperFaction into a kind of, a lifeline for studios riding those waves, we could say. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about SuperFaction and how it has evolved to make certain that, yes, these indies can ride that wave, can ride the wave of opportunity coming in 2025?
Sure. I took over as CEO of Credits, as we were called back then, back in March, and rebranded the company to SuperFaction back in June, and really started looking at what does the market need right now from a creative partner. I think that historically you could say, hey, just give us a bunch of creative by the end of the week. Do they have to be good? No, but we just need a lot of them, and then you would just feed the funnel. The black box would spit out, and then you can iterate on it. What we found kind of post IDFA and all of the changes that happened was actually it needs to be less and it needs to be better. So refocusing around quality, around CGI, around playables kind of always have a space. Finding that right mix for our publishing partners, I think, is super important. And we're also diversifying who our clients really are. I think traditionally we were working with AAA, and we still are. We have a handful of the biggest publishers in the world, and we do quite a bit of work for them. But also kind of this refocus on what are we doing for the indies? If this is the market where the next great game companies are being developed out of the ashes of all of this layoffs and all of this turmoil that we've had, how can we help support them? Because once we're partners with them, we're partners for life. That's the way we look at it. And really finding out what is it that they need. Do they just need a trailer, a launch trailer? Okay, we can do that. We've been doing that for a very long time. What else might they need? And kind of going to a little bit further up the funnel and thinking about, okay, you want to launch in Japan. How is that going to work? It's like, we're not just going to do some localized creative. Let's bring on a product manager. Let's talk about pricing structure in Japan. Let's talk about, are there any holidays or events that we can be leveraging that would be useful in that audience? Because if you just localize creative and throw it over the fence and hope for the best, I don't think you're going to find really great results. I think you really need to have, and that's just when we're looking at expanding to new territories and markets. So we're really trying to think about, okay, let's move the conversation from just talking to growth managers that are handling UA budgets. Let's talk to EPs and studio heads. What do they need? What are the goals that they're trying to accomplish? And how can we use our network of our internal team as well as our vendors and freelancer structure to help them solve their problems?
Talking to a totally different audience that actually does shape that. UA is one thing, but as you said yourself, it was, just do something, do a playable ad, do a trailer, do whatever. This is more about the strategy of that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's certainly a piece of it. And then the other area that we're kind of pushing into a little bit more is talking about licensing and IP. I think licensing and IP have always had a place to help solve the discoverability problem. But where my old company, FTX Games, that I ran, and we got acquired by Tilting Point before I kind of wanted to get entrepreneurial again. But I have a decade of experience kind of doing this licensing side of things. And if you're building a game from scratch specifically for a license, that comes with a bunch of risk on both sides. And now I think that the trend is more towards brand integrations, taking these big existing games, which represent less risk to the licensor, and then only doing them for a 3-month stint around that marketing window for that particular project, which decreases the risk on the developer and publisher side. So that's another place that we're kind of pushing into, working off of kind of my experience and my network around that, as well as our ability to drive, AAA creative around promoting those integrations and kind of handling them. That's another place that I'm really interested in. And then how that fits with our other audience, with that indie audience. Whenever I've talked to licensors, they're like, okay, you're always talking about the same handful of 10 different licenses that work really, really well for free to play. But there's massive amounts of competition around those. What about all of that overlooked licenses that have a niche audience, that don't fit the mold of a big cast of collectible characters with upgrade paths and all these other things? How can we start looking at some of those and figure out, is there an indie fit that makes the perfect game for that particular license that makes sense? I think Netflix is doing a bunch of really great stuff in that particular realm, but they're working mostly with their particular IP, right? So I think that's another space. So when I think about like kind of where are the opportunities, kind of looking at from an indie space, be like, okay, what are the projects? What's your favorite movie of all time? What show are you watching right now? How about making a game that might fit? What would you do to create a bespoke game specifically to capture what's really unique about that? So that's another place that we're really kind of looking at and be like, okay, I think that there's pretty interesting opportunities to kind of help people out and help some of these indies get discoverability, which is always a challenge.
Absolutely inspiring, to be honest with you, Casey, because I know so many studios on the indie end of the market, the smaller, younger end of the market, who make great games. They've got the creative and technical skills to make phenomenal things, but that's their core focus. They don't have the marketing teams, they don't have the licensing teams, and in a lot of cases, they don't know where to start. So plugging into this huge global market in a way which makes them relevant to the brand owners, the IP holders, to not just, as you said at the top of the show, pumping out a huge quantity of creatives, but helping them discern what to do with it, what works, what's quality, makes a huge amount of sense, because we've got some really talented people out there, but in a lot of cases they're sort of inward looking, if that's not a horrible thing to say. We know we can make great games, but how do we take that and then make it relevant to a much, much bigger audience?
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain a bit more how you layer on these extra services? And do you have any examples, case studies, or maybe even some numbers you could share with us?
Yeah, I think we're beholden to a lot of our partners from an NDA perspective on a number of the initiatives that we kind of work on, kind of being an agency.
Yeah.
We'd rather highlight our clients in places where they can kind of drive that narrative. But I think what you're saying, I think, is really interesting from a perspective of a lot of these indie devs looking inward. We want them to, right? That's where the innovation happens. That's where they're really kind of focused, and that's where they're really going to be able to succeed. We don't need them to be focused on all of the marketing stuff. And functionally, historically speaking, that was the publisher that would kind of come in, and these indies would lose a lot of the control of being able to how to do that. So I think that there's a new model of development around this, of thinking about what does light touch publishing mean? How light touch can you be, where you're keeping the destiny of that project and that studio in the hands of the creatives, but at the same time just giving them the assistance where they need it. And that comes in from a publishing perspective of IP licensing. There's a funding aspect to that. There's a bunch of pieces of that I think become very, very interesting to kind of go down. So we want those indie developers to stay indie. We want them to stay innovative. That's where the next great stuff is going to be made. From a perspective of which IPs and licenses that we've kind of worked with, I think that there's a couple of things that we're working on right now. There's a couple of bigger ones where we're like, okay, let's do some, like I had mentioned, we're on the AAA piece of things. We've done some stuff with PUBG. We've done some stuff that's kind of out there with a handful of other projects. My company, historically, we did the litany of all of those big AAA licenses of Star Trek and Narcos, Breaking Bad, and a bunch of other things that we've done through the years. So there's those two really interesting buckets, and I still think that there's this opportunity for that overlooked IP, which I'm pretty excited about.
The opportunity for indie developers to work with these licenses, especially when it's a brand takeover, so it's a limited time thing that ties into a lot of the user acquisition that we've talked about. When you run an event, and being able to bring in some of those niche products or brands is incredibly valuable. Way back in the olden days, when Peggy and I started in mobile, the company I worked with picked up a Star Trek license through a meeting in a pub, and we came up with something absolutely phenomenal, which never actually hit the market, but that was only because the company in question didn't exist at that point. But it can be transformative for studios to be able to take that creativity and indie sensibility and connect with something. It might be niche, but it's still introducing them to a whole new audience. So I absolutely hear what you're bringing to this, and it's joyful to hear that there's a company out there that's not necessarily a publisher, but that is on the side of the developers.
Yeah, and you had asked about some numbers, and there's numbers for sure around what that licensing looks like and the value that adds to projects. When you see your organic traffic explode, when you're able to cut your user acquisition costs by 80% for that initial launch window, those are all the types of things that give this generalized lift we're like, oh, wow, that was, sometimes it can be quite a bit of work to get approval process. That still happens for sure. I think anybody that's done licensed game has horror stories of, oh my gosh, this one actor went on hiatus for however long, and you're like, we just need him to approve this one shot, but he has complete control over how his likeness is presented in the game, and you have to wait. So building the expertise and understanding how to navigate that approval process is one thing. And then when you finally get to launch, your publisher, your development partner is just like, I hope that work was worth it, right? I hope that work made all sense. And you see it from the fan base if you've done an authentic job of kind of representing that IP. You see it in the fan base like, oh my God, I can't believe they included the cat from, we did a Hunger Games game. I can't believe they made the color of the cat right from the book because the movie messed it up. It's like the little details that the super fan's going to see when you nail that stuff. They love it. They love it. They share it. And all of that lift starts happening. And you create this kind of cycle of where you're bringing audience in. You're having a dialogue with fans about that license and really making them understand that you love it as much as they do. So I think it's really important to kind of have that pairing right. But when you have that pairing right, the numbers are great. The numbers are absolutely fantastic.
Casey, I want to keep things going because I'm aware of time, but we're looking at the shift towards just-in-time models, that you described as similar to what Hollywood does. Can you explain a little bit more for me about what you mean by that and what the value is and what we can learn from the whole Hollywood approach?
Yeah, so because my company was working, and I think we've talked quite a bit about licensing in Hollywood, watching the way movies get made, which is by all accounts a much mature medium relative to the games industry. There's just this crazy unsustainability about the way that we're making games that just we're seeing it obviously play out where you build these giant monolithic teams that function incredibly inefficiently, but it really didn't matter because the industry, as long as the industry is going up, it's fine to kind of be a little bit wasteful because the winners are going to be winners and everybody else is just going to go find another job after they release their game and they get laid off. And I don't think, I think we've hit that threshold. I think it was, it was exacerbated by, the COVID push and then decline where we're in this place where we had these gargantuan teams that were kind of overfunded and we had this massive amount of layoffs. And going back to what I was saying before about having people that were great product managers that were exposed to a lot of different games, that seems like a much better model. When you're making a movie in Hollywood, you have a core production team that's relatively small, and everybody else that's on set is coming on to be just in time for the piece that they need. They need to be on set. Maybe they're on one set in the morning and they're on another set in the afternoon. They're getting more reps about being able to be good at their job. And at the same time, the production company's not carrying the cost of a guy to stand in the corner and wait his turn to do his thing. And meanwhile, the games industry's been doing that forever. You have server engineers that are just sitting there waiting for the client to be built. You have concept artists that are really important at the beginning of a project and really important for DLC and add-ons. But a lot of times in the middle, they're literally sitting in the corner and doodling. They could be getting better at their job. The publisher doesn't need to be carrying their cost through all of it. Why can't we move towards more of an outsource and freelance model that is more sustainable, where workers are getting mastery over their own destiny? I think that they're burnt out. I think that they're looking at the publishing system. They're like, this is my third, fourth layoff in the last 5 years. This is crazy. It's not sustainable anymore. So I'd much rather, and that was one of the things then when I set out to create SuperFaction, and really the name, why we renamed it to SuperFaction. The idea that we have this SuperFaction and underneath it we have all of these factions of workers that can come on and do their thing to help solve problems for those core development teams, finding those core teams, figuring out what they need, providing this umbrella, be like, okay, you're going to work on this, and then providing those workers with consistent available projects to work on. So I have this, this grandiose vision of where I think that the industry is going with these smaller teams, increased reliance on outsourced vendors and tools in the forms of AI and others, where I'm like, how can I position to be in the right place to help that happen? And then pair that with, you have all of these great indie development teams that were spun off of big publishers that are now making the game that they wanted to make the whole time they were working on LiveOps for a 5-year-old project, right? So now they have the opportunity to make their passion project. They're super smart, super capable. What are the tools that they need to be able to succeed, and how can we provide them in an efficient manner that kind of makes sense for everybody.
And there is, of course, that talent pool, Casey. Are you dipping into that? Because you brought it up yourself. It's so soul destroying to be, 3 studios, 3 layoffs in 3 years. And I know people who've gone through that.
Yeah, I think we all do. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're doing some outreach for that. So if anybody sees this and they're like, hey, I'm into that, like join the faction. Let's bring them all on board. We have projects that are coming in. Like I have my network of folks, and we're always trying to grow that database. So to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to collect those people, really smart people that are capable. Let's find them work. Let's find them projects, and then let's find them funding, because I think it's a great time. The adage of get greedy when everybody's scared, be scared when everybody's greedy. I think everybody was greedy for a long time. Now everybody's scared. I think it's a fantastic time to put money into projects. I think there's great projects that are being developed right now. Man, I wish I had some money to put into it. I'm working on that too. That's another. I've got some irons in the fire, but that's another one that I'm really interested in trying to solve, because I think those are the pieces that are going to bring this maturity to this industry in a way that we hadn't seen yet. And I think it's the time for us to get there.
I love
I
it.
think,
This is the
yeah,
time, Brian.
I think you're right.
After so much doom and gloom, this is what we're hearing. This is the time. It's really, yeah, it's encouraging to hear it, Casey.
Oh, hugely, and I think you're absolutely hitting it right on the head, the nail on the head there, Casey. Specialization is where it's at. The sort of the generalist approach, that everything under one roof. We need to be able to do localization and QA and marketing and UA and LiveOps and blah 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 blah. There are elements of that. You need somebody in-house who understands that and can have those conversations, but you don't necessarily need, as you said, 25, 50, 100 QA engineers and testers sitting in a big building at the start of a project. So I absolutely hear you.
If you look at games as the intersection between technology and art, Hollywood was art and increasingly becoming more technology. Games are technology increasingly becoming art. So yeah, there is this where a lot of these things are converging in ways that I think are very interesting.
I want to swing back a little bit more to the IP, because you made this so core to what you're doing, understanding the IP, licensing the IP, to get it right, integrate it properly. That is extremely important. But we've had people, and you remember as well, Brian, we had Iron Fox Games, one of our most popular shows last year. So talking about the untapped opportunity in sort of nostalgic older IPs, reviving, for example, old classic video games. And that was his thought about, where the opportunity is. What's your thought or advice for studios who are looking to leverage IPs in a meaningful way, maybe even going on the hunt for some classic video games to bring in to the mobile space?
I think nostalgic gaming IP has its place for sure. And we're in a generation now where people, that are my age grew up playing a lot of games their entire life, and bringing back a lot of that stuff makes a lot of sense because there's an audience for it. The problem that I've always had specifically with gaming IP is that it comes with a very specific set of expectations. Like, this is a game, but you're going to take my game and you're going to make a totally different game in a different genre that doesn't really work. And I've always been like, does that work? And then like Monopoly goes like, hold on, let me show you how much this works. So I think that there's a lot of places for that there's a lot, but again, I would go back, it's a passion project. Let's make sure that it fits. Let's make sure that it fits, and the audience that you're going after is also going to be receptive to it. There's a lot of ways, we've gotten very good as an industry to be able to test thesis. Like, how can we test to see if our market's really going to like that? We have tons of data. We have a ton of ways that we can kind of get that in front of people, examine that, and kind of test around it, run ads around it, kind of bringing to, App Store. There's a million ways for kind of test those theses. That's one of the things that SuperFaction has done historically for quite a bit. Is like, okay, you have a great idea. Before you drop $1 million in developing that idea, let's figure out art style, let's figure out audience, let's figure out genre, so we can create these mock-ups and get that into the market. So I would test a lot of those theses. We're still going to be a data-driven industry as a whole, but pairing it with the passion around what that team wants to do, I think is absolutely critical.
But I equally love the fact that Hasbro has taken Monopoly, which I find, forgive
Yeah.
me, Peggy, the most tedious 8 to 10 hours of your life, because you can't have a short game, and turned
No.
it into a mobile game, which I find completely joyful. So it works both ways. But I absolutely hear you, Casey. Yeah, it has to be appropriate. It has to be something the team, the players, that works for you as a studio.
So let's talk about strategy, because that's what you're helping studios with as well. Could you share a bit of a checklist about the steps you could recommend for a studio on the verge of launching a big event or campaign push?
The struggle is always, specifically with these timed events, because the industry we don't do very well with hard deadlines, to put it mildly. So all of a sudden you have a hard deadline. That was the other big struggle with licensing. It's like you can't miss the marketing window. The game's got to come out in sync with the marketing window that's 60 days ahead of a theatrical release. If you're any day that you're late, you're just leaving money on the table and you're kind of missing it. So I think it requires a very, very, let be thoughtful. Let's be realistic about what can get done and what can't get done. But like making sure that the pieces are fitting in a way where there's no surprises. Like surprise is the enemy of success. So really trying to figure out the right places to kind of communicate, so everybody's in kind of lockstep to kind of get this stuff done, and what needs to happen where. So from a licensing perspective, that's always like, we need approvals. Like, what's the first approval that we're going to get? Let's knock those things out kind of absolutely first, and let's make sure that we're on board so that any delays in that aren't going to affect everything else. But when you're getting ready to kind of launch something, figure it out, do this one thing, post-mortem it at the end. What went right? What went wrong? I know that's a pain, because it's like, oh, that's going to slow us down from getting to the next. It's like, but then you're going to make the same mistake again. So it's going to cost you more. Slow down, be very direct and deliberate with how you're kind of managing things, I think is super important.
I would like to pick up on that if I could, Casey, because we've talked about the specialization, not trying to do absolutely everything, but leveraging partnerships. So in my experience and from some of the conversations we've had, there are certain kind of like core skills that developers see as theirs and that they're loath to share. So do you have any advice or tips for our listeners on leveraging partnerships, and maybe not being precious about what's mine and what's yours? Or what have you seen that some of the studios run into when it's like that willingness to share? Because I absolutely agree, we're a fantastically open sector, but there is a point where it's like here and no further.
Yeah, the silos.
Yeah, for sure. And I think code and tech is always going to be a little bit of that, even when we're it depends on the size of the team and kind of what they're looking at. I would say that people are being a little bit too precious over their data still. Like if we're a creative agency and we're trying to make great ads that are going to work, give us the data. Like let us help you in a way that kind of makes sense. And that's still a struggle. To this day, it's still a struggle to kind of be like, guys, just give us agency access to your MMP. Like let us kind of go in and be able to see firsthand, and we'll help you kind of with reporting. Because a lot of times they'll be like, no, this is what an ad. I'm like, okay, we're just going to send you how this works. Let's be more open with the data. Most of the times you can kind of get it anyway. There's enough tools out there where you can kind of get a pretty good sense of a lot of different games. So I think that data needs to be more open. I think tech was always going to be the slow mover to kind of get there, and that kind of generally makes sense. But it's not. I think that we need to be able to kind of share great ideas with each other, and I think we do a good job of those pieces. But I think the data piece needs to be a little bit more open.
And the point about the data is that everything is in there. All the answers are in there. So you want people to be looking at it with a different lens and understand what is really in there, which is not where we are right now. And it's very difficult to get to that point, but we all understand that we have to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's part of the partnership, one of the things that we need to be looking at, I like to look at partnerships overall in the longer term. Here we are, 2025, take a longer term view out into the year, and if a studio is thinking longer term, where do you think they should be focusing or thinking where this is all headed? Because it's about creative services, partnerships, licensing. There's a lot that you've unpacked throughout the entire episode, Casey. It's given a lot to think about, but what's your take on the future for creative in the gaming space?
Yeah, I think that it's the convergence of all of these ideas. I think the common thread kind of through all of this is we went through massive disruption. The pieces are all over the ground. How are we going to be rebuilding a structure that kind of makes sense for everybody in a way that it's not a winner take all, where there's all of these great teams that are going to be, when we've seen this type of disruption before, when mobile launched, when free to play took off, from all of these digital distribution, we've seen these big kind of earth shaking changes to the industry. How we rebuild it is kind of up to us to kind of figure out what actually makes sense. And what makes sense to me is that we're finding innovation again, because I think that we've strayed, that we're supporting our resource, our most precious resource, our people, that we're open-minded about tools and tech that become not just viewed as threatening for removing jobs, but enabling for creating amazing creative and still allowing people to kind of be at the helm of what that creative looks like. And then from a perspective of how we're marketing this and what the industry and what players want and need, I think is a very interesting. We were always like, oh, it's okay, we'll find a new audience. I think we've hit the new audience. Like, this is it. Like, if 90% of people are playing games on some sort of device, you've got kind of market saturation. It is what it is. Will that change? For sure. You look at the stuff that's going on in UGC and Roblox and all these other things. Kids are growing up with an entirely different, and that wave is going to be pushing through. So watching kind of what's happening, I think, becomes more interesting, because the line isn't always just automatically going to go up like it always did in the past. We can't just keep tapping new audiences. There's emerging markets. Sure. Yes, there's great. It's, India, Northern Africa, all this stuff is really fantastic. And yes, but they're already playing games. We just have to figure out how to monetize people that are playing those games. So I think it's more about looking at a little bit internally, which the industry hasn't done a very good job of, because again, we just kept growing, so it didn't matter. We didn't have to be efficient because things were just growing. So looking internally, looking at kind of how we can help clean up our house a little bit and make it so it's more of a sustainable way that we're treating our players better, that we're treating our workers better, and that we're building kind of the next wave. And I think there's a lot, when I share these thoughts with other people in the industry, I think there's a lot of people that are looking at it the same way. They're like, this is the chance for us to kind of look at what the future is going to be and help shape what that's going to be, rather than kind of just doing what we always did because it works.
And finding those new efficiencies. I mean, you're bringing together the art and science in a way, if I think about it, and the whole idea of creative services, creative as a service, that's the art and science of it coming together, the data of it coming together. I have to ask you then, because you bring it up, it's about efficiencies. So where could small studios start immediately to move in that direction? What do they need to cut, to increase, to do better, to avoid, to start moving in this direction? What are they doing that they should start doing or stop doing?
It's always going to be a challenge for these smaller studios, because what they need is they need money, and they need people and resources, and then they need players. And finding all of those things, I think that the traditional model is like, oh, I'm just going to go to GDC and I'm going to pitch a bunch of publishers, and hopefully they fund me, and hopefully that deal structure allows me to keep the lights on. And maybe this game will make me big enough that I can forge my own destiny, become a publisher, or get an exit. Like that, those are the pieces. And I think that that's become such a challenge, because the way of those deals have historically been structured. And I've been on the other side of that. My company was running publishing. I think we had a bit of a kinder model with our developers, but I think those are difficult. They're difficult partnerships to kind of get into. So I think that for smaller publishers, start looking at what you can kind of accomplish by yourself and things that they can potentially do. I think there's a lot of opportunities if you're from a funding perspective, I think that there's new opportunities that are surfacing now with crowdfunding and a bunch of other different ways that didn't necessarily always exist. I think that the IP licensing thing will help with discoverability. But do you need a publisher to do that? No, you don't need a publisher to do that. You can find a licensing agent. You can contact a lot of these people yourself. You can put those pieces together. I think Apple and Netflix, they're amazing vehicles for people, for those indie developers to get exposure and get their costs covered and get a game to market that doesn't necessarily have all of the strings attached to it that a typical publisher agreement will. So I think those are fantastic. And they also, I can gush about how much I like subscription models for mobile games, because it just flipped the script on what kind of game you're making, and really opened the door for a lot of new innovation, where now your core KPI is D30 engagement rather than ARPDAU. Like, that's amazing. You're making a fun game then. Your goal is to make a fun game for an audience that keeps playing it month to month. Like, that's great. That's super fantastic. So I think that there's a lot of different, but it can be totally overwhelming. Talk to me. I'm like I mentioned, I'm always happy to just help people out. We did a big indie outreach campaign a few months ago, where we just we spammed literally just a ton of indie devs and be like, here's my Calendly, just like book some time with me. And I had call after call after call with a bunch of indie developers being like, what's your pain point? Like, how can we help you guys be able to succeed and find your way into it? It's fantastic. Maybe I planted a bunch of seeds for collaboration later. I know I took a lot out of those conversations myself, of just getting an idea of like, what are they working on? What are they trying to solve? How can I position SuperFaction to be in a place to help them solve it when they're ready?
Okay. I like this guy, Peggy. He needs to come back. So, Casey, it has been an absolute joy and a pleasure. So many incredibly interesting but yet tangible things that I think a lot of our developer listeners are going to be able to take away and think about. And folks, the one thing we hear every single episode is the constant we have in games is change. So the old mindsets, the old approaches are simply not going to cut it. So if 2025 is going to be the year we all want it to be and need it to be, then listen to this man, for he is wise. Casey, it's been an absolute joy. But before we let you go, we're going to bring it back. We have a question, or a couple of questions we ask every guest that we have on the podcast. The first is, what are you playing right now? What's obsessing you? What's maybe taking up a little more time than you think it should be? And then secondly, the big one, favorite game of all time?
Ooh. Playing right now, I think I'm with like the majority of the industry playing Balatro quite a bit. Game is so well done. And every time I think I have the strategy and like, I don't need to play it, that was the strategy, I'll find another one. It's super, super fun. I'm also playing Paper Trail, which is a game that's on Netflix. Super, super innovative. Love it. On PC, I'm still playing Fortnite with my kids. It's like a blast. Like, we have, we squad up. It's a great time. Favorite game of all time? Probably Diablo 2. I sunk so many hours. I loved that game. And I'm playing PoE 2, Path of Exile 2, which is the spiritual successor for sure. I played Path of Exile for a while. So those are taking up my hours when I'm not on the paddle boards, on the bikes in the other garage, or getting work done.
Phenomenal. And great answers. I'm having to limit myself in my Balatro use quite strictly, so I'm with you entirely. And Diablo 2, there's an entire other podcast there when we could just like fanboy over that little work of genius. But Casey, thanks again. We're going to have to let you go. It's the waves are calling, the studio is calling, and quite frankly, I think the industry should be calling. And if not, hopefully this podcast will change it. So it just remains to say thank you again for your time. Thank you for being so open, so candid. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure there's going to be an awful lot in there for our listeners too as well.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I'd just like to add on top of that, not only did we get some tough love, some great ideas, and some direction for the indies in the audience, they can also get in touch with you if they want to join, the faction, be part of the SuperFaction. So that I find very, very encouraging and optimistic and positive. But how would they actually do that, Casey? What's the best way?
Just send me an email, Casey at SuperFaction, superfaction.com. I answer all the emails like I had mentioned before. I love hopping on calls with people. I love talking shop, talking about the industry. I've been passionate about it for 2 decades. And I'm always open to talk to some people.
Excellent. I know there was a reason we had him on, Brian. So accessible and so smart. It's been a joy to have you on the show, Casey.
It absolutely has, 100%.
All right.
And if you're up for it in the future, we'll get you back. Learn more about what SuperFaction has done to change the industry in 2025, and maybe hear more about the waves and the bikes and the evolution of the world of games.
Thank you guys so much. Really enjoyed it.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Ann Saltz, and that's a wrap until next week.